Okay, so today we're going to look at federalism and what the federal and federalism really means. So so when the founders wrote the Constitution, one of the things we've been talking about is how that we talked about separation of powers and how that the separation of powers is done to separate the powers and therefore not let the federal government be too powerful, or any one branch of the federal government become too powerful, so that each branch has a different job, so no one branch is real powerful. And then the video you didn't get to watch was about checks and balances, and so let me talk to you real quickly a little bit about checks and balances. Checks and balances are actually, let me just go ahead and do that with you real quick. So checks and balances is, we've got the three different branches. So right here you've got the first branch, which is the legislative branch, and I want you to write this down. They make the laws. We've talked about that. That's the separation of powers. Executive branch, they enforce the laws. We've talked about this. So this is all the separation of powers. Each one has their own job to do. They enforce the laws. And then down here, the judicial branch, they are the ones that interpret the laws. And what we mean by that is they decide if a law is constitutional. They decide how that law should be applied. So they actually look at the language of the law and decide those things. And so part of that is judicial review. Okay, and so each branch has a different job, and this is the main job. So you should write that down. If you need to pause the video to do that, do so. But then each one has their main job, but then the other branches kind of have a little bit of control over what those other branches can do. Okay, so the legislative branch, it's their job to make the laws, but the president it's one of his smaller jobs is to sign laws into office, or laws into sign it into law. It needs his approval, and so he can also veto it. So that's a check. So we call it checks and balances, but really it should be checks that balance. Okay? The check that the executive branch has on the legislative branch is that he can say, no, this law is not one that I think we should have, and so we're not going to pass it. Now, if it's a really popular law and the people want it, then it'll probably get enough votes in the Congress to where they can override that veto. In other words, if they get 2/3 of a vote in the House and the Senate, they can override the veto. So he has the power to veto legislation. That's his check on their power. But if it's a really popular law, that check would not come into play because they can get enough to override the veto. Well, his job is to enforce the laws, and he can go to war and things like, he can, he directs the armed forces. He can't go to war. So Congress has powers over the budget. They can pass laws that the president can't veto if they have enough votes for it, and they can impeach and remove the president from office. And so these are examples of checks that the Congress has on the executive branch. So that keeps him from becoming, or her, as the case may be someday, that keeps the powers balanced. The judicial branch has checks on the legislative branch as well, a big check. And that's this idea of interpreting the law. They can say, hey, that law that you passed, it's unconstitutional, and therefore it is thrown out, no longer a law. The law, now, can they just say that willy-nilly? Can they just say, oh, whatever, we don't like that law, we're going to say it's unconstitutional? No. They shouldn't do that. Now, they can, nobody's sitting back there and say, we think you're just doing that to be mean, or because you don't like somebody. No, they have to be sound in their reasoning, and their opinions are published, and why they're declaring laws unconstitutional is very clear and thorough. But at the same time, the Senate has a check on the judicial branch, and that goes back to the fact that the Senate approves presidential appointments, because one of the checks that the president has on the judicial branch is that the president gets to pick the people that are on the judicial branch. He picks them, nominates judges. So the president's power on the judicial branch is he gets to pick them. The president's check on the judicial branch's power is he gets to pick who is in the judicial branch. But once you're there, you're there for life. So the new president doesn't get to come in and kick somebody out. Now, the courts, the judicial branch, their check on the executive branch is they can declare presidential actions and like executive actions and things like that unconstitutional. Executive orders, they can say that's not constitutional. You can't do that. So we've got checks. Each branch can do one thing to another branch. They have a say in the other branch's power. And so that keeps any one branch from becoming too powerful. All right, so that's checks and balances. So actually I'm going to stop this video and then we'll pick back up with federalism in the next video in just a second.